Greetings, this is Charlie Wharton, and welcome to our Creating Contentment podcast. Our goal with this effort is to try to get a head start on making the most of our opportunities, whether it's getting our week off to a good start or just making the most of today. We want to help you find contentment. Now, if it were up to us, we might be able to pull off this idea of contentment without much of an issue. But the problem with life is that we don't live on our own personal island. Sure, it's nice to have our people around us. However, we have to take the good with the bad, our friends with our foes, and everyone in between. So how can we find contentment in a diverse world made up of all kinds of people? Not only is that a challenge in today's society, it's also the topic of today's podcast. When we look at the roll call of Jesus' earliest disciples, we see their names, and we may think that it's just an answer to a question in a Bible class, but a closer look can tell us a much deeper story. The New Testament book of Matthew is often attributed to Jesus' disciple by that name. Interestingly, as Matthew describes the first 12 apostles, he makes an interesting observation. He lists himself as the tax collector, and he identifies one of the guys by the name of Simon as a zealot. Now, I don't want to make too much of this observation, but I do find it interesting. As a tax collector, Matthew was someone who took taxes from the Jews and gave them to the Romans who occupied their nation. In today's society, we've come to understand the value of taxation, but to the Jews, it probably was a nagging reminder that they were subservient to the Romans. And that leads us back to Simon the Zealot. The Zealots were a Jewish political party that fought to remove the Roman Empire from Judea. In other words, they were revolutionaries. So in simply listing their names together, we get a glimpse of the deeper calling of Christianity. These two guys had a very different perspective on things, but that didn't stop Jesus from calling them both to work with him. As I thought about this, a couple of things seem to stand out. First, I'm fascinated that Jesus would pick two very different personalities to work in his core group. And second, I'm intrigued that Matthew would indicate that two people coming from very diverse backgrounds were willing to work together and promote a larger cause. It wouldn't surprise me if there weren't some pretty spirited debates in those 3 years that they were together. But the fact remains that they stayed together and they worked together. When we look at the Bible, one of the interesting things is how the Lord calls upon people with different backgrounds to work together. Have you noticed that Jesus used an unpopular Samaritan, not the popular Levite or the priest, to star in his parable about the good neighbor who helped the man who was a victim of violence on his journey from Jerusalem to Jericho? The use of seemingly incompatible individuals doesn't stop with Jesus. In Galatians 3:28, Paul calls diverse people into unity by writing, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." In fact, Paul, the staunch Pharisee who became the apostle to the Gentiles, would challenge the church in Colossae by writing, "Do not lie to one another, since you laid aside the old self with its evil practices, and have put on the new self, who is being renewed to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him." A renewal in which there is no distinction between Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free man, but Christ is all and in all. That's Colossians chapter 3, verses 9 through 11. Isn't it interesting that the same Jesus who put a radical and a conservative together in his inner circle unified people from diverse backgrounds? As we look around us, it's easy to see how diversity drives wedges between people. It could be as personal as being involved in a long-standing argument with the guy at work. It could be as polarizing as doubting the veracity of someone from another religious group. It could be as partisan as dismissing the intelligence or the wisdom of someone who registers with another political party. It might even be as nationalistic as looking down on those born and raised in other countries. However, if Jesus was willing to bring together two people as diverse as Matthew and Simon to change the world, what does that say about our need to work together in our communities? Paul's point from the previous reading from Colossians could be challenging enough, but he didn't stop there. Listen to what else he has to write about spiritual unity in Colossians 3, verses 12 through 15. So, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. Beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you are called in one body, and be thankful. Oh, by the way, did you notice how unbiased Christian love was tied to personal peace? We live in a world that seems to be splitting wide open. We draw lines based on political agendas. We toss social media grenades at each other from behind the safety of our keyboards. We blame those people, whoever they happen to be, for the ills that we identify in society. As we reflect on this, I wonder if we see ourselves as commentators rather than citizens in our communities. Interestingly enough, this third-person mentality tends to rob us of our ability to find contentment. When we see others as the enemy, we give them control over how we feel about some type of conflict. When we see them as adversaries, we give them control over how we feel about ourselves. When we see them as the thorns in our side, we give them the power over our pain. What could happen if we stopped feeling like victims in some ongoing skirmish and started retaking control over our own emotions? By forgiving them for what they do or say to us, we pick how we choose to feel about them. When we love them, warts and all, we see the good that they bring to the world and even to us. When we work together to solve community issues, we can build on diverse perspectives and different skills. As we prepare for the week ahead, let's choose to view the people around us in the most positive way possible. Let's not fear what they're thinking. Let's not belittle what they're doing. Let's not overemphasize what makes us different. Let's capitalize on what allows us to work well together. We may never see the world the same way, but when we choose to have a positive view of someone else, they may not appear as scary as they might have seemed in the beginning. Interestingly, when we change the way we think about others, it changes a couple of things about us. First, I believe they'll sense a difference in the way that we interact with them, which might have a ripple effect on multiple attitudes. Yet maybe as importantly, we may feel more peace in our lives. We may not be any happier about the things that people do to us, but I believe that we'll be more relaxed about how we treat them and how we feel about them. We wish the best for you as you work your way through your week. We hope that you'll find the best in the people the Lord puts around us in our everyday lives. And we hope that you join us next week for another chance to discuss ways that we can create contentment.